The Titanic. Yeah, it's a name that still kind of sends shivers down your spine, doesn't it? Even after
Yeah.
all these years. But we're not focusing on the sinking itself today. We're going deeper into a lesser-known part of the story. Titanic's stop in Cherbourg, France. Just imagine you're about to set sail for America on this legendary liner. But instead of joining the crowds in Southampton, you're starting in Cherbourg.
Hmm. Yeah. An interesting point of departure, isn't it? It's April 10th, 1912. The Titanic has already left Southampton, but she's got plenty of room for more passengers. Cherbourg was a really important stop, both for picking up passengers and all those, luxury provisions that made her so famous.
Our sources really paint a vivid picture of, like, this bustling scene as the Titanic is approaching the harbor.
Hmm.
But there's a bit of a problem. She's way too big to dock directly.
Oh, absolutely. That's where the SS Nomadic and the SS Traffic come in. They were smaller ships, specifically designed as tenders, for these massive liners.
I see. So picture this. You're a passenger, all excited, waiting your turn to board. But even getting on the tender wasn't exactly fair, was it?
Not really, no. The Nomadic was for the first and second class passengers, while third class boarded the Traffic. It might seem like a small thing, but it really highlights those class distinctions that were so ingrained back then, even in how people boarded the ship.
And speaking of little details, we found something pretty interesting about the Titanic's departure from Southampton. It wasn't exactly smooth sailing, so to speak. Apparently, there was almost a collision with another ship, the SS New York.
Ah, yes, that's right. The New York actually got pulled towards the Titanic. You see, it was because of the displacement of the larger ship. Basically, the amount of water it pushes aside, it's, physics. Luckily, a nearby tugboat saved the day.
Wow. Talk about a close call. Makes you wonder, what if that tugboat hadn't been there? History could have been totally different.
Absolutely. And this delay, it meant that the passengers waiting on the tenders in Cherbourg would have seen the Titanic's funnels appearing on the horizon, well, about an hour later than expected, after a pretty choppy wait at sea. Can you imagine? That mix of anxiety and excitement, seeing this majestic liner finally coming into view.
I bet. Must have been a huge relief. And then things really get going, the passenger exchange. Some people are getting off, but many more are coming aboard, including those who traveled across the English Channel just to join the Titanic at Cherbourg. Really shows how much excitement there was, doesn't it? But something I found interesting was only 21 of these new passengers were French.
Yeah, that's a detail that often gets overlooked. The passenger list from Cherbourg, it really shows how global the Titanic's appeal was. We're talking about over a dozen nationalities: Americans, English, Belgians, Canadians, and so on. Cherbourg, it wasn't just a stop, it was almost like a little snapshot of the world in 1912. People from all over coming together with their dreams and aspirations.
And every single one of them had to, make their way across that swaying gangway between the tender and the Titanic, held steady by crewmen as they crossed. Our sources even mentioned a woman who twisted her ankle during the transfer. A small thing, really, but maybe, a hint of the bigger tragedies to come.
It is. It is a poignant observation. And while those individual stories are fascinating, it's important to remember Cherbourg wasn't just about passengers. It was about the provisions, too. This is where the Titanic loaded up on all the luxuries that made her so famous.
Oh, right. You talk about the fancy meals, those lavish parties. The opulence of the whole Titanic experience.
Exactly. And those experiences, they were all made possible by the sheer amount of goods they loaded in Cherbourg. Think about this. 75,000 pounds of meat, 15,000 bottles of beer, 10,000 bottles of wine. Not to mention 12,000 bottles of mineral water. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
So Cherbourg really played a big role in creating that image of the Titanic as a floating palace, right? It was almost like the supply chain for a five-star hotel, but at sea. All those incredible meals, the drinks, everything the passengers enjoyed, they all started their journey right here.
Exactly right. And with all those supplies safely on board, the Titanic set sail for Queenstown, Ireland. As they were leaving, the crew of the Nomadic, they called out, "See you in 15 days." Kind of a casual farewell, but knowing what happened, it's pretty chilling.
It really is. Knowing their fate, that see you later is, it's almost heartbreaking.
It really does emphasize the fact that at that moment, no one could have imagined what was about to happen.
It makes you wonder, why was Cherbourg such an important stop for transatlantic voyages like this?
Right.
Was it a hub for something specific?
Well, that's where it gets even more interesting. To really understand, we need to look at the bigger picture of transatlantic travel and migration, at the beginning of the 20th century. But before we get into that, let's take a closer look at some of the individuals who boarded the Titanic at Cherbourg.
We've talked about, well, the whole scene at Cherbourg, the passengers from all over the world, even that near collision earlier. It really, it sets the stage for all the human drama that happened on the Titanic. But let's focus on some individual stories now. They really give you a sense of who was on board and why.
Yes, definitely. These personal accounts, they really add another layer to our understanding of the Titanic. Like, take the Navratil family. Michel Navratil, he was a Slovak tailor. He was traveling with his two young sons, Michel Jr. and Edmund, hoping to, start a new life in America.
A single dad with two little kids on such a huge journey. That's pretty unusual, especially back then. Was there more to their story?
There was. Turns out Michel had actually kidnapped his sons from his estranged wife. He was using fake names to, avoid being caught. They boarded the Titanic as Louis and Lola. It's a really sad story, even more so because, well, Michel Sr. died in the sinking. His sons, they became known as the Titanic orphans. They were rescued and eventually, reunited with their mother.
It just goes to show, behind the grand story of the Titanic, there's so many personal stories of hope, desperation, even secrets. Speaking of remarkable stories, I can't forget Margaret Brown, the unsinkable Molly Brown. Didn't she board at Cherbourg, too?
She did. Margaret Brown was a socialite and philanthropist. She was coming back from a European trip when she boarded the Titanic. Her story is one of incredible courage. During the sinking, she helped load the lifeboats. She even urged the crew in her lifeboat to row back and look for survivors. And all that chaos and fear, she was amazing.
Yeah, she was quite a woman.
Yeah.
It's incredible how some people, they step up in the face of such unimaginable things.
It really is. And while some stories like Margaret Brown's became famous, others are more like quiet reminders of the everyday life that were changed forever by the tragedy. The Sage family, for instance. They boarded at Cherbourg, hoping for a new start in America. John Sage, a businessman, was traveling with his wife and their 4 children. They were second-class passengers.
So, a classic immigrant story, full of dreams. Did they make it?
Sadly, no. The whole Sage family died in the sinking. It really shows, for many, the Titanic represented both, huge hope and incredible risk. A chance for a fresh start that ended in unimaginable tragedy.
It's hard to even imagine the loss, the heartbreak that so many families went through. These weren't just names on a list. They were real people with dreams, families, futures.
Exactly. And their stories, they still resonate with us today. They create this tapestry of human experience that goes beyond time. We have one more passenger story, one that shows the global impact of the Titanic. But first, let's look a bit deeper at Cherbourg itself.
You mentioned earlier that, to understand it, we need to look at the bigger picture of transatlantic travel. So, tell me, why was Cherbourg such a crucial stop on this route?
Well, think about it. At the beginning of the 20th century, Europe was going through a lot of, social and economic change. The Industrial Revolution, it led to, huge population growth, and it created a lot of poverty, especially in Eastern and Southern Europe. Millions of people were looking for better opportunities, and America, the land of opportunity, was a major destination.
So Cherbourg was a gateway to new beginnings for a lot of these people.
Exactly. The big shipping lines, like White Star Line, the company that owned the Titanic, their main departure point was Southampton in England. But Cherbourg was a key secondary port, especially for people coming from continental Europe.
Makes sense. It was more convenient for people traveling from, places like France, Germany, even further east.
Exactly. And the passenger list from Cherbourg, it reflects that. Remember all those different nationalities? Many of them were probably immigrants or refugees trying to get to a new life in America.
So Cherbourg was this funnel bringing together people from different backgrounds, different situations, but all united by, this desire for something better. It adds a whole new dimension to the human side of the Titanic, doesn't it?
It does. And it wasn't all just about hardship. Some passengers were looking for adventure, opportunity, or even just, to visit family and friends who were already in America. Their reasons were as diverse as the passengers themselves.
Makes me wonder, were there specific things that drew people from certain countries to the Titanic? Why choose that ship over others?
You see, the Titanic was more than just transportation. It was a symbol of luxury, technology, progress. For many, boarding the Titanic wasn't just about getting to America. It was about, experiencing the best of the best. the peak of Edwardian opulence.
So it was a statement, like a badge of honor, to sail on the biggest, most luxurious ship in the world.
Precisely. And for those who had, faced hardship, uncertainty, the Titanic offered a glimpse of a better future, a taste of the good life they hoped to find in America.
It's fascinating, this mix of social forces, economic conditions, and personal dreams all coming together on this one fateful voyage.
Absolutely. And it's this intersection of history and individual experience that makes the Cherbourg stop so interesting. It's not just about where people boarded the ship. It's about why they were there, where they were going, and the hopes and dreams they carried with them.
I'm hooked. Now, you said you had one more passenger story. What about this last passenger who boarded at Cherbourg? We've explored why Cherbourg was so important as a departure point, the dreams of those hoping to get to America, and even the allure of the Titanic itself. But you mentioned one more passenger story, one that highlights the global impact of the tragedy. Tell me more.
This story, it really shows how a ship like the Titanic could connect people from all over, and also the mysteries that still remain. It's the story of the Allison family. First-class passengers from Montreal, Canada. They were heading home after a vacation in Europe.
A wealthy family coming back from a trip abroad. Sounds familiar. What's special about the Allisons?
Well, Hudson Allison, he was a successful businessman. They were traveling with their two young children, Lorraine and Trevor, and also their maid and a nurse. A picture of privilege, you could say.
Mhm.
But here's where it gets really sad. Lorraine, she was only 2 years old. She was the only child in first class who died in the sinking.
Oh, that's just awful to be surrounded by all that luxury and still meet such a tragic end. Hard to imagine.
It really is. And the story, well, it doesn't end there. The bodies of Hudson, his wife, their maid, and even baby Trevor, they were all eventually recovered, brought back to Montreal for burial. But Lorraine's body, it was never found.
So for all those years, the family never knew what happened to their little girl. Did they ever find her?
That's the amazing part. In 1985, they found the body of a child in a grave near where the Titanic sank. A lot of people thought it was Lorraine. Can you imagine that feeling of hope after all that time?
Yeah, like a chance to finally bring her home.
Exactly. But sadly, DNA testing later proved that the child wasn't Lorraine. To this day, no one knows where she rests.
It just shows that even with all the technology we have today, some mysteries, well, they might never be solved. And the human side of it, the family's grief, the search for answers, that's what really gets to you.
It speaks to the power of the Titanic story, why it still fascinates us, even after over 100 years. We're drawn to these personal stories, the people who boarded that ship with their dreams, their hopes, their vulnerabilities.
It's like Cherbourg itself becomes this symbol, not just of a place to depart from, but a place where all these stories come together, each one unique but connected by this shared experience.
Exactly. And as we think about the Cherbourg stop, with all its grandeur, anticipation, and of course tragedy, it's worth asking, what can we learn from this? What stands out to you most from this deep dive?
For me, it's realizing that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about people. The Titanic, it's often seen as a symbol of wealth and disaster.
Yeah.
But it becomes something much deeper when you think about the individual lives that were on that ship.
I agree completely. And the Cherbourg stop, with all those different passengers, their reasons for boarding, it really brings that point home. It wasn't just a stop on a trip. It was a crossroads of hopes, aspirations, and, destinies.
It also reminds us that even choices that seem small, like, boarding at Cherbourg instead of Southampton, can have huge, unexpected consequences.
That's a powerful thought. The Titanic story still resonates because it's a stark reminder of how fragile life is, how vulnerable we are, and the enduring power of hope, even when faced with the unknown. And maybe it makes us think about our own journeys, the choices we make, and how life can, take unexpected turns.
Well said. The Titanic and its passengers, the ones who boarded at Cherbourg and everywhere else, they teach us about history, about ourselves, about the power of stories. And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive into the Titanic's Cherbourg stop. We hope you've gained some new insights into this iconic event and all the lives it touched.
Thank you for joining us.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those questions. See you on our next deep dive.